My sister-in-law had both hands in a donation bag when she said it. 9 of us in that kitchen, a Sharpie going hand to hand like a collection plate. My grandmother's kitchen, and my grandmother 3 miles away at Ridgeview Rehabilitation, with her right hand still curled in her lap, and nobody had told her we were coming. Danielle pushed the bag down with her knee and looked at me over the top of it. "No husband, no kids," she said. 31 years old, and the only man who slows down at that curb is lost. She ought to be grateful somebody looks at all. Somebody by the stove laughed. The comfortable kind. The kind that tells you a sentence has been said in this room before and always landed. Her place. She meant this house, where I had slept 4 years on a folding cot because Grandma got up twice a night. My brother Trevor was at the sink with bubble wrap under his arm. He said, "Danny." Then he turned the water on and rinsed a cup nobody needed rinsed, and that was the whole defense. Danielle reached back in and came out with a spiral notebook, green cover, the corner chewed soft from the drawer under the phone. "Look at this," she said, and she read out of it in a high, slow voice, the voice people use for a dog. March 11th. Gretchen washed my hair. Gretchen sat with me during the storm. She laughed. She wrote down chores, like a resume. Grandma kept that notebook 11 years. Every night before her pills she wrote the day down. What the weather did. Who came. Who stayed. Danielle dropped it back in with the dish towels. "It's going to Goodwill. She won't know the difference. She doesn't know what year it is." Grandma knew what year it was. That morning she had asked me, one word at a time, whether her peonies had been divided yet, because they were crowding and she wanted them split before the ground got hard. Danielle had them dug out on Sunday. She had the porch swing taken down too, for curb appeal. My Aunt Deb said, "She's at peace where she is, Gretchen." She said it kindly. That is the part I kept. I put my hand in my cardigan pocket, pressed the button on the side of my phone twice, and felt the small buzz that means it started. Then I set the tape gun on the counter, flat, and asked a question with nothing in it. "How often does he drive past?" Danielle loves a question. 3, 4 times a week since spring, she said. Dark blue. Sits at the end of the block by the hydrant. Ask any neighbor on this street. They've all seen him. She smiled into her wine. He might be the last man who ever does. Ohio needs one person in a conversation to consent to a recording. There were 9 of us, and I was one. I kept my palm flat on the counter until it stopped. Then I said, "I'll take the paper boxes, and I'll run the donation bags over Saturday." Nobody argues about paper boxes. They left at 11. The notebook rode home on my passenger seat instead of in a bag. The county had given us until the 29th to document 6 months of withdrawals from Grandma's checking account, or her Medicaid application went down. 11 days. Every statement I still needed was in a house full of people who were laughing. So I needed them calm for 11 more days. That is the entire reason I said nothing in that kitchen. Danielle had a closing date she was sure I didn't know about. I had 11 days, a tape gun, and the question nobody in that room had thought to ask. Who pays a man to sit outside a house belonging to an 86-year-old woman with $4,000 left in her checking account? Within a week, I would have his name off a public log at the county building. A month after that, he would sit down across a table from her and tell her what he had kept every single time she paid him. "My name is Gretchen Nichols. I'm 29. I process insurance claims part-time for $19 an hour, and that job is the only reason I could be in a bathroom at 3 in the morning for 4 years without getting fired. If you have ever been the one in a family who stayed, the one everybody counts on and nobody counts, stay with me tonight. And subscribe if you want to hear how this ended." There were 4 boxes on my back seat. I want to tell you about the second one. The next morning, I did not call a lawyer. I drove to the county building on Sackett Street, stood in line behind a man buying a plat map, and asked the recorder's clerk for the complete instrument history on parcel 14000362, 5 years back, certified. Certified means the raised seal, and a courtroom never asks you where you got it. The clerk printed the index and turned her monitor a little so I could see, because county clerks are the kindest institution in America. "Busy little parcel," she said. 4 instruments, a deed from 1968, a transfer on death designation affidavit recorded in August of 2022, the one I knew about, the one Grandma signed at her own kitchen table with a Bic pen, and 2 from March of this year that I had never heard of in my life. I paid for the copies. Then I paid $34 more to record 1 page of my own, an affidavit of facts, 3 lines saying I was the named beneficiary on the 2022 affidavit, that I had never released that interest, and that anybody told otherwise should contact me. Stamped 9:12 a.m. $34 was the first thing Danielle ever paid for what she did to my grandmother. She paid it the next afternoon at 4 o'clock, when a title examiner in Columbus opened her file, walked the chain over my 1 page, and typed a line into the commitment that would eat the next 5 weeks of her life. Exception 9. She called my phone 21 times that night. I let it ring, and I opened the second box. The second box was bank envelopes, half of them still sealed, going back to 2019. Grandma never threw away paper. She used to say paper is how you prove you were here. I opened them in order on the floor of my apartment, and by 2 in the morning I had 6 months laid out in rows. March. 4 withdrawals. 300, 500, 500, 800, $2,100, and every slip signed by a woman holding a power of attorney that was 12 days old. Then, on the 9th of April, a certificate of deposit my grandmother had rolled over every year since 2011 was closed out, and $28,600 moved into an account that had been opened at that same branch 11 days earlier. Then April, May, June, July, August. In person every time at the Ashbury First Branch on Route 4, 4 Tuesdays a month, and the slips got bigger as they went. 1,100, then 1,400, then 2,000. $30,700 across 5 months on top of the certificate. $61,400 out of an account belonging to a woman who could not stand up without a gate belt and 2 people. That is the number the county had asked me about. Not because they suspected Grandma of hiding money, because Medicaid looks back 5 years at every dollar that leaves, and money that leaves without an explanation gets called a transfer, and a transfer gets you a penalty period. And a penalty period means the nursing home stops getting paid while you keep needing a bed. 9 months, the caseworker had calculated. 9 months of private pay Grandma didn't have. The closest facility that would take her without payment was in Wheelersburg, 70 miles south. I want you to understand the shape of this. Somebody took the money that was supposed to keep my grandmother 11 minutes from the only family she had, and the punishment for taking it was going to land on my grandmother. I put the envelopes back in date order and rubber banded them in stacks of 12. Then I sat on the floor with my back against the couch until it got light, and what I thought about was not any of the people in that kitchen. What I thought about was February 8th. She had been on the phone with me when it happened, mid-sentence, telling me she'd found the good scissors. Then a sound like a chair moving. I got there in 9 minutes and she was on the kitchen floor between the table and the stove, awake, looking at me, and the whole right side of her face had gone quiet. At the hospital, they said the words that get said: occlusion, dense hemiparesis, aphasia, wait and see. Danielle came the second day. She brought a folder. By the end of that first week, she had made herself the one who talked to the doctors, because Trevor is her husband and Trevor is Grandma's grandson, and I am, in Danielle's accounting, the granddaughter who never made anything of herself. She started a group text called Family Sheet. 9 people. It had my grandmother's blood pressure in it and her discharge dates and, eventually, sentences like Gretchen has had 4 years alone in that house. Let's all be honest about what that was about. I stopped answering it in April. I kept reading it every day. Here is the part I have to say out loud, because it is the reason I did nothing in that kitchen for so long. I was afraid of being the difficult one. When you are the person with no husband, no kids, no degree, no money, and you are the person who moved in. The family decides fairly early that you are either a saint or a scavenger, and they will flip you from one to the other in a single afternoon if you inconvenience them. So for 6 months I was pleasant. I was pleasant at the hospital. I was pleasant at the rehab. I was pleasant in a kitchen where 9 people packed a living woman's dishes. At 6 in the morning on the 21st of August, sitting on my floor with $61,400 in rubber bands in front of me, I stopped being pleasant and started being accurate. I did not announce it. There was nobody in the apartment to announce it to. I just took out a legal pad and wrote a date at the top. And under the date I wrote the first thing I needed, which was 2 pieces of paper from March. The certified copies came in a manila envelope on Friday the 21st. The first one was titled Revocation of Transfer on Death Designation Affidavit. 2 paragraphs, printed off a template, revoking the 2022 designation that named me, dated March 12th, signed Ada Nichols. The second one was a general power of attorney. Same date, same template font, granting Danielle R. Nichols full authority over all real and personal property, including the power to sell, convey, and execute instruments of transfer. Signed Ada Nichols. My grandmother has signed her name the same way since 1958. Ada L. Nichols. The L is for Lorene, after her mother, and she put it on everything. On birthday cards, on the back of photographs, on the check she wrote me for $80 when I graduated high school. Both March signatures said Ada Nichols, no L, and both of them were right-handed, sloping up, confident, the signature of a woman with a working right arm. On February 8th, my grandmother lost the use of her right arm. At the bottom of each page was a notary block. Notarized this 12th day of March 2026, at Ashbury, Ohio. Kelly D. Brandt, Notary Public, State of Ohio, commission expiring 2029. Personally appeared before me, it said. The affiant, being known to me, did sign in my presence. I drove to Ridgeview that afternoon with both copies in my bag, and I did not take them out, because I was not going to hand my grandmother a photocopy of somebody pretending to be her. She was in the day room by the window in the chair she likes. Her hair needed washing. Her right hand was in her lap under a folded towel the way the therapist sets it. She said my name. It takes her a second and a half. Gret Chen. I asked her about March. I asked it carefully, the way the speech therapist taught me. 1 idea per question, yes or no available. Did somebody bring you papers in the spring? She looked at me. Then she said, 2. And then, slower. Bank lady. Did you sign them? The left hand came up off the arm of the chair and she turned it over, palm up, and looked at it. And then she looked at me and said 1 word. No. I asked her if she wanted to tell me what she said to them. It took her almost a minute to get it out, and she got it out whole. I said, ask me when Gretchen is here. Behind her, down the hall, somebody's television was playing a game show. An aide came through with a cart of little paper cups. My grandmother sat in the chair with her hair unwashed and her hand under a towel, and told me, in 8 words, that she had held a line in a room where nobody was on her side. I asked the front desk for her therapy calendar for the week of March 9th, and I asked Mercy St. Anne's Medical Records Department for the radiology report from that week. They gave it to me without blinking, because I have been the emergency contact and the named healthcare agent on her advance directive since 2019, which is a piece of paper Danielle had apparently never bothered to look for. March 12, 10:15 a.m. Modified barium swallow study, radiology, Mercy St. Anne. 10:15 in the morning at a hospital in another township, on the same day and inside the same hour that a notary in Ashbury swore my grandmother personally appeared before her and signed with the arm that does not work. I made 2 copies of that schedule in the lobby for a quarter apiece. On Monday morning, I stopped at the recorder's counter again and asked the clerk something I had thought about all night. When a member of the public asks for copies of a parcel record, do you keep the request slips? She said they keep the logbook. She said it's a public record like everything else in the room, And she got it out and set it on the counter and let me turn the pages myself. July 2nd, 11:40 a.m. Parcel 14 Elza 0362. Copy of deed and TOD affidavit. Requested by R. Kessler, Kessler Investigative Services, Springfield. His handwriting was small and neat, and he had printed his license number under his name because licensed men are proud of their numbers. Dark blue sedan. Sits at the end of the block by the hydrant, 3-4 times a week since spring. I photocopied the page. Then I went out to my car and wrote his name on the legal pad under the date. And under his name I wrote the only thing I actually wanted from him. Not an apology, a file. That night I finally read the notebook. 11 years of it. A spiral notebook is not a diary. There is no feeling in it anywhere. It is a ledger. Rain all day, 41 degrees. Deb called about the church supper. Gretchen brought the good bread. The page Danielle read out loud in that kitchen was from 2023, March 11th, 2023. She flipped to it at random and got lucky, because almost any page would have worked. I read it backward, newest first, which is how you read something you already know the ending of. Grandma got a lot slower in the last 2 years. In 2019, the entries are 4 lines. By 2025, some of them are 2 or 3 words. Cold. Gretchen came early. Good day. The last entry is February 8th, 2026. It is 4 words long and the pen goes off the line at the end, down and to the right, which is the direction your hand goes when you are already falling. Found the good scissors? Then 11 blank pages. I did something at 3 in the morning that I am not going to apologize for. I got a pen out of the kitchen drawer and on the first blank page I wrote the date, and under it I wrote 3 lines. August 25th, $61,400, 6 months, Tuesdays. 2 papers from March that she says she never signed. Ada L. Nichols has an L in it. Somebody in that family had been keeping a record for 11 years, and nobody had noticed that either. The next morning, the caseworker at the County Job and Family Services office told me what I already suspected, in the flat voice of a woman who has said it 400 times. Documentation of a transfer, she said, means either the money coming back or a law enforcement matter on file. Family disputes are not a law enforcement matter. Suspicion is not a law enforcement matter. I asked her what happens on the 29th if I have neither. She said, then the penalty stands and the facility gets a 30-day notice. I asked what she needed to hold it open. She said an open protective services investigation would hold it. Adult protective services, county intake, and once there was a case number, the eligibility file could go administrative pending, which in county language means the clock stops. 2 things were true at once, and I want you to see them both. If I filed that report, the clock stopped, and my grandmother kept her bed 11 minutes from me. And if I filed that report, Danielle would know within a week that somebody was looking, and everything I had not yet collected would start disappearing. I sat in my car outside the county building for 20 minutes with the phone in my hand. Then I made a list of what I did not have yet. The hospital chart, which I had. Her words, which I had. 2 forged instruments, which I had. A notary who swore to something impossible, which was on the face of the documents and could not be shredded now that the county had it. And a man in a dark blue sedan whose name I had gotten out of a logbook 2 days earlier, and who is the only piece of this that could still walk away. So I did him first. I did not knock on his door, and I did not call him, and I did not put 1 word in writing that a lawyer could ever call a threat. I mailed him a certified letter, 1 page, 4 sentences, with 3 attachments. The attachments were the recorded revocation with the raised seal, the recorded power of attorney with the raised seal, and my grandmother's therapy schedule for March 12th with the barium swallow study on it at 10:15 in the morning. The 4 sentences said, my name is Gretchen Nichols. I live at 411 Pearl Street, which is the house you have been photographing since April, and it belongs to my grandmother, who is alive, at Ridgeview, and who never signed the enclosed. Whoever hired you told you a different story about who I am. I am not asking you for anything. And this letter is the only one I will send. I signed it and I paid $4.80 for the green card. I want to be honest about what that letter was. It was not mercy. I had counted the ways he could go, and there were only 3. He could throw it out. He could take it to Danielle, in which case I would learn something from what she did next. Or he could do the third thing, and the third thing was the whole reason I mailed it certified with the seals showing. A licensed man who has been paid 19 weeks to watch a woman does not want to find out from a courtroom that the file he built was pointed at the wrong person. He called on the 27th at 9 in the morning. He did not say hello. He said, "Is she really at Ridgeview?" I said yes. He was quiet long enough that I heard a diesel go past on his end. Then he said, "I'm in Springfield. There's a place on Route 4 called the Bluebird. I'll be in the back booth at 2 o'clock and I'll bring what I have." Ray Kessler is 58 years old, and he came into that diner in a golf shirt with a laptop bag and a red accordion folder, and he set the folder on the table between us like it was something he had been carrying up a hill. He said, "I want you to know I never went inside the house. Not once. Everything I did from the street, and every hour of it is on an invoice." Then he opened the folder, an engagement letter dated April 6th, signed Danielle R. Nichols, retaining Kessler Investigative Services for surveillance and documentation regarding a family financial matter. 19 weekly invoices, $250 each, $4,750 total, every single one initialed in the top right corner, DN in ballpoint, 19 times. A scope of work sheet in Danielle's handwriting, bullet points, and I read them standing up because I could not do it sitting down. Document subject's male visitors. Document subject entering the residence after 11 p.m. Document subject at bank locations with elderly parties card. Document any alcohol purchases. There were no male visitors. There were no alcohol purchases. In 4 years, I had gone to the bank with my grandmother's card 11 times, always with her, always with the deposit slip she filled out at the kitchen table, and I had gotten a receipt every time because she taught me to. Ray had written that in his own reports, week after week, in the driest language a man can use. No visitors observed. No unusual activity observed. Subject returned from pharmacy 8:40 p.m. Subject took trash to curb. 19 weeks of a licensed investigator's reports, and the entire body of evidence against me is a woman carrying garbage cans to the street in her grandmother's cardigan. The only man who drove past my place in 4 years was the one my sister-in-law paid to. Then Ray turned his laptop around. He said, "On July 14th she called me at home. That call I recorded. And I recorded it for me, not for you." He hit the space bar. Her voice came out of a cheap laptop speaker in a diner with a jukebox 2 booths down, and she sounded exactly the way she sounds when she is being reasonable. She asked him whether he could get into Ridgeview. She said the church group goes on Sundays and nobody checks anybody. She said she needed 1 photograph. She said, and this is the sentence, word for word, that I have thought about every day since. "I just need her holding a pen over a paper. It doesn't have to say anything. It just has to look like she's signing something with her hand on it." Ray had said no. On the recording, he says no 4 times, and the 4th time, he says, "Ma'am, you're asking me to build something." She said, "I'm asking you to be useful." He closed the laptop and looked at the folder for a while, and then he said the thing that told me he was going to be all right. "I kept every invoice she initialed because a client who asks you for that once will tell people you offered." I did not ask him for the folder. I asked him for a copy, and I asked him one other thing, and it was not an accusation, and it was not a favor. I asked him whether he would be willing, when the time came, to be in the room where she swore in writing that none of this existed. He said, "When's that?" I said I didn't know yet. I said I would know a week before he did. I filed the Protective Services report on the 28th of August, in person, at the county intake window, with copies of everything and my grandmother's advance directive on top. The intake worker read for 11 minutes without saying a word. Then she wrote a case number on a card and slid it across, and she said, "Somebody will be out to see her inside 5 business days." I called the caseworker with the number that afternoon. She put the eligibility file administrative pending, and the 30-day notice to Ridgeview came off the calendar, and my grandmother kept the bed by the window. That was the 28th. On the 31st of August at 4:15 in the afternoon, I walked up to the front desk at Ridgeview with a bag of clean nightgowns and a bottle of the shampoo she likes, and the woman at the desk would not look up from her screen. She said, "Ms. Nichols, I'm going to have to get the administrator." The administrator came out into the lobby to say it, which is how they say the bad ones. She said there had been a report of concern regarding a family member and financial matters, and that pending review, my visits would need to be supervised or suspended, and that the responsible family contact had provided documentation. I asked who the responsible family contact was. She said she wasn't able to discuss that. I asked her whether the documentation she had been provided was a case number issued to me the day before, by the office I had walked into myself. She looked at her folder. She said, "I'm not able to discuss that either." Here is what Danielle had done in the 3 days between my intake appointment and my nightgowns. She had called Ridgeview and told them that Gretchen Nichols was the subject of an Adult Protective Services investigation involving an elderly relative's money, which was, in the way that the worst lies are, a true sentence with the people switched. Down the hall, past the desk and through the double doors, 40 feet from where I was standing, my grandmother was in the chair by the window with her hair unwashed, because they wash it on Thursdays and nobody at that facility knew that she does not like the way they do it, that she tips her head back too far, that she needs a towel behind her neck. I did not raise my voice in that lobby. I want to be clear that this is not a virtue. I did not raise my voice because a woman who raises her voice in a nursing home lobby becomes the story, and I could not afford to be the story for another 25 days. I said, "I'm the healthcare agent on her advance directive. Please put a copy of it in her chart and note the date I gave it to you." Then I left the bag of nightgowns and the shampoo at the desk, and I walked out to the parking lot. An aide came out after me, young, maybe 22, with a lanyard full of pins. She stood there twisting the lanyard, and she said, "She asks about you every day at 4. She sits there because that's when you come." I asked her to tell my grandmother that I was not sick and I had not gone anywhere. The aide said, "She'll ask me what day you're coming back." And I stood in a parking lot in August and could not answer a question from a 22-year-old girl in scrubs. I got in the car. I got the legal pad out of the door pocket and I wrote one line on it, and it was not a promise, and it was not a threat. It was arithmetic. She has 25 days until her closing. I only need to be standing in the room on the last one. Then I drove to the 24-hour pharmacy on Route 4 and bought the correct shampoo again, and mailed it to the facility addressed to my grandmother's room, because a package to a resident goes to the resident. 2 days later, Danielle called me and left a voicemail, and I have it still. She was not angry in it. That is the part people never believe. She was warm. "Gretchen, honey, I know you're upset. Nobody's trying to cut you out, okay? But there's a whole family here, and there's a house that needs to be dealt with, and Trevor and I are the ones doing the work. So here's what I need. There's one piece of paper with your name on it from years ago, and one you went downtown and filed last week, and the title company is being ridiculous about both of them. Come Thursday. Bring your ID. Let's just clean this up so we can all move on with our lives. And then you and I can figure out how to get you back in there to see her." Then, at the end, the sentence she could not help. "You know, it's not healthy, being the only thing in somebody's life." Thursday was the 3rd of September at Trevor's house, and I got there 10 minutes early with my driver's license in my back pocket. There were 5 of them in that kitchen. Danielle, Trevor, my Aunt Deb, my cousin Shauna, and a man in a golf polo I had never met, who turned out to be Dustin Pruitt, Danielle's cousin, who was described to me as helping the family out on the property. Danielle had a folder open on the table and a pen lying across it at an angle, the way they set it up for you at a car dealership. She said, "Sit down, sweetheart. Do you want a water?" The paper was a disclaimer and release of interest. 1 page. It disclaimed any and all interest of Gretchen A. Nichols in parcel 14-0362 arising from the 2022 transfer on death designation affidavit, and it asked me to withdraw the affidavit of facts I had recorded on the 19th of August. There it was. The whole thing. In one line of legalese. Their entire 5-week problem, which had a name in the title commitment, and the name was Exception 9. Everybody in that kitchen watched me read it, and I let my hand shake. Not on purpose. I stopped holding it still, which is a different thing, and Daniel saw it, and I watched something come up behind her eyes that I can only describe as appetite. I said, "Can I ask what the house is selling for?" Dustin said, $168. I asked whether there had been an appraisal. Danielle said, "It's an as-is cash purchase, Gretchen. There's no appraisal in a cash deal. This is exactly the kind of thing you don't understand." The appraisal on that parcel, ordered in October by the prosecutor's office to calculate what she had tried to take, came in at $257,000. I said, "I'll sign it." Nobody moved for a second. Deb said, "Oh, honey," and put her hand flat on the table. Then I said the only other thing I had come there to say, and I said it looking at the folder and not at anybody's face. "I'll sign it at the title company, with their closer, in their office, on the day of closing, in front of whoever else is signing. I want it done properly, with the full search and everything sworn out the way they do it, because I'm not signing away my grandmother's house at a kitchen table with a pen somebody else brought. I want to tell you exactly why I said it, because it is the single coldest thing I did in all of this, and it looked like defeat. A title company will not insure a sale like that on a handshake. When the seller signs at the table, the seller signs an owner's affidavit. It is a sworn document, notarized, in which the person conveying the property swears that there are no other agreements, no undisclosed instruments, no powers of attorney, no liens, and nothing withheld from the title company. Danielle was going to be the person signing on my grandmother's behalf, using a power of attorney recorded in March. If I signed at that kitchen table on the 3rd of September, she would have gotten her paper and never had to swear to anything. If I made her go through the front door, she would have to sit down in a conference room, in front of a notary and a closer, and swear in writing that the March papers were exactly what they said they were. I was not giving up the house. I was moving where she had to lie. Danielle stood up and hugged me. She actually hugged me, and she smelled like the same perfume she has worn since Trevor's wedding, and over my shoulder she said to the room, "See, I told you all she'd be reasonable about it." Shauna started talking about a cleaning service for the basement. Dustin got out his phone and said something about the 25th being fine for his lender. The 25th of September, 10 in the morning, Ohio Valley Title on Sackett Street, 4 doors down from the county recorder's counter where I had already spent $34. I said I would be there. Then I went out through the living room to leave, and Wren was on the floor in front of the television with a plastic bin of markers. She's 8. She held up a drawing of a horse with too many legs and told me it was for Great-Grandma's new room, and then she said something and went back to coloring, and I stood in that doorway with my keys in my hand. She said, "Mommy practiced Great-Grandma's name a lot. On the yellow paper." She said it's hard to do a name that isn't yours. I said the horse was beautiful. I said Great-Grandma would want it taped up where she can see it from the bed. Then I walked out to my car, and I sat there, and I made the only decision in this entire story that I have never once revisited. That child was never going to be in any of it. Not a statement, not a deposition, not one sentence in a report with her name on it. Whatever else happened, nobody was ever going to tell Wren that she was the reason her mother went to prison. I had a notary who swore to a signature made by a paralyzed arm. I had 19 initialed invoices. I had a hospital in another township at 10:15 in the morning. I did not need an 8-year-old, and I have never been so glad about anything in my life. The next 3 weeks were the strangest weeks of my life, and I need to explain what they felt like. Because from the outside, I did almost nothing. From the 3rd of September to the 25th, Danielle believed she had won. You have to understand what a person like that does with 3 weeks of believing she has won. On the 4th, she posted to the family sheet. Good news, everybody. Gretchen has come around and is signing at closing on the 25th. Proud of her. This family sticks together. Deb replied with a heart. Shauna replied with 3. On the 6th, she sold the piano. It was an upright with a scratch across the fallboard, and it was worth maybe $600 to a person who tunes pianos, and it was worth something else entirely to a woman who learned Claire de Lune on it in 1953. Danielle took $200 cash from a man with a trailer, and she wrote in the group text, "One less thing to move." On the 8th, she went to Ridgeview. I know exactly what she said in that room, and I know it because the speech pathologist charted it, in the neutral language they use, in a progress note I would not read for another month. Patient tearful during session. Reports family member informed her that her home has been sold and that her granddaughter signed the papers. Patient repeated the phrase she signed it 3 times. Session terminated early at patient request. My grandmother spent the 8th of September believing I had signed her house away. She was on the visitor list Danielle controlled and I was not, and there was no way for me to get a message into that building that would not go through the front desk of the woman who had put me on the wrong side of the doors. So I did what I could do, which was 3 things, none of them the thing I wanted. I called the regional long-term care ombudsman on the 9th and gave her the case number, the advance directive, and the date I had handed a copy to the administrator. I filed a complaint with the Secretary of State's office about a notary commission on the 8th, and I attached both certified copies and the barium swallow study, and I wrote 4 lines of cover letter with no adjectives in it. And on the 7th, on the curb outside 411 Pearl Street, in the dark, I took a peony root out of a pile of yard waste with my hands and put it in a coffee can with dirt from the bed it came out of. 6 of them, actually. Grandma had 6 plants along the south fence, and Danielle's landscaper had dug them out and stacked them at the curb to be hauled. And they had been lying at that curb since the middle of August. Peony roots are almost impossible to kill. That is not a metaphor. It is a fact about peonies. And Grandma used to say it every fall, with a spade in her hand, like a woman announcing her own funeral arrangements. I put the can in the trunk of my car, and it lived through a whole winter back there, because peony roots go dormant, and a dormant root does not care where it sleeps. The ombudsman called me back on the 10th at 9 in the morning, and she was on the phone with the facility administrator by 10:30. And at 4 o'clock that afternoon the desk called me and told me in a very careful voice that there had been a documentation review and my visits would resume. That is not a miracle. That is what an ombudsman is for. There is an office in every state whose entire job is that phone call, and almost nobody knows it exists until they are standing in a parking lot with a bag of nightgowns. I got there at 4:15. She was in the chair by the window. She had been crying, and she had been crying long enough that the aide had put a towel on her shoulder, and when she saw me, she said one word, twice. You. I told her I never signed anything. I said it 4 or 5 times in the short sentences she can hold. I did not sign. It is not sold. Your house is your house. Then I asked the aide for a basin and a pitcher and 2 towels, and I washed my grandmother's hair in the day room with her head tipped back on a rolled towel, the way she likes it. And while I was doing it, she told me the rest of March. It came out over about 20 minutes, in pieces, with a lot of waiting. 2 papers, a pen she could not hold. Danielle putting the pen in her left hand and holding her wrist, and a woman she called the bank lady, who Grandma identified with the certainty of a small town, because she said, Brandt. Her mother did my hair at the Curl. Kelly Brandt worked the member services desk at the Ashbury First Credit Union on Route 4, which is the branch where $61,400 had left my grandmother's checking account in person on Tuesdays. Then Grandma said one more thing, and she said it looking at the window and not at me, and it was the only time in this entire story that she said anything about my brother. Trevor stood by the door. Before I left that afternoon, I stopped at the therapy office and asked the speech pathologist for one thing in writing, and I did not tell a single person in my family that I had asked for it. He didn't sign anything. He didn't hold her wrist. He stood by the door. On the 12th of September, Kelly Brandt called my cell phone at 7:40 at night. She said, "You need to withdraw that complaint." I did not say anything, which is a thing I learned to do somewhere in the middle of all this, and it turns out that if you say nothing, people who are frightened will keep going. She said the Secretary of State's office had sent her a certified letter. She said she was required to produce copies of everything she notarized in March, and that they wanted her employer's logbook with it. She said she had a family. She said she had been at that credit union 9 years. She said, "This is defamation, and I have talked to an attorney, and if you don't withdraw it, I will sue you for every dollar you have." She had picked the wrong woman for that sentence. I have $4,000, a 9-year-old Corolla, and a coffee can, with 6 peony roots in it. Then she said the thing that I wrote down word for word on the legal pad the second I hung up, because it was not a threat, it was a confession with a threat wrapped around it. They told me she had already signed them in her room. They said all I had to do was stamp it. That's what they told me. Personally appeared before me. The affiant, being known to me, did sign in my presence. She hung up on me. And then, 3 days later, on the 15th of September, that woman, with a certified letter from the Secretary of State on her kitchen counter, walked into a conference room and notarized another document for Danielle Nichols. A power of attorney affidavit confirming that the March instrument remained in full force and had not been revoked, for the benefit of the title company. I did not know that yet. I would find it in a file 2 weeks later, and when I did, I sat in my car outside the title office and put my head against the headrest because a woman who is being investigated for one false notarization and responds by performing another one is not somebody you have to defeat. She is somebody you have to stay out of the way of. On the 16th of September, 9 days before the closing, I carried everything I had into the Cranmer County Sheriff's Office and asked for the Economic Crimes Unit. Detective Paul Ruddick is a heavy, slow-talking man in his 50s with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and he took my accordion folder and read it for 50 minutes in a room with a poster about opioid disposal on the wall. He read the recorded revocation. He read the power of attorney. He read the radiology report. He put on headphones and listened to 4 minutes of a kitchen on the 18th of August, in which a woman with 9 people around her says out loud how many times a week a car she is paying for drives past a house she does not own. He read the 6 months of withdrawal slips and Ray Kessler's 19 initialed invoices and the scope of work sheet in Danielle's handwriting. When he got to the words document, any alcohol purchases, he took the glasses off his forehead and actually put them on. Then he said, "Ms. Nichols, I want to say something before we go any further. In 7 years in this unit, I have never had somebody walk in here with certified copies." I told him about the closing on the 25th. He put his pen down. He said, "You understand what happens at a closing?" I said I did. He said, "She's going to sign an owner's affidavit in front of a notary, swearing there are no undisclosed instruments and no other agreements." I said, "Yes." He said, "And she has already sworn out one false instrument and she's going to swear to that one on top of it." Then he sat back and looked at the folder for a while, and he said the thing that I have thought about more than anything else anyone said to me during all of this. "You know you don't have to be there." I said, "She needs my signature. If I'm not there, there's no closing. If there's no closing, she doesn't sign anything. And 9 days from now, you have a family argument about a piece of paper from 2022. He didn't like it. He said so. He said the word entrapment, and then answered it himself, out loud, the way a man does when he has already thought it through. That entrapment requires the state to induce a crime, and the state was not inducing anything, and nobody on this earth was making Danielle Nichols swear falsely to a notary except Danielle Nichols. He said he would have somebody there and he would need the folder. I said the folder was his. Then I walked 4 doors down and paid for a second certified set, because I had already learned that you never hand over your only one. Then I asked him for one thing, and it was the last move I made before the 25th. I asked him whether he needed the man who wrote the invoices in the room, or whether he would rather have him in the parking lot. Detective Reddick smiled with about a third of his mouth. He said, Kessler, he'd come in? On the 20th of September, Danielle had a party. She called it a goodbye to the house. She put it in the family sheet with a wineglass emoji, and 9 people came, which was the same 9 people from the night we packed, and I went, because a woman who is signing on Friday goes to the party on Sunday. There was nothing left in that living room. The rug was gone, the piano was gone, the swing was off the porch and sitting in Dustin's garage across town, and somebody had put a folding table in the middle of the floor with a bag of ice on it. You have never heard a room sound like that. No rug, no curtains, no piano. 9 people's voices coming back off bare plaster. Danielle got loud around 8, not mean loud, happy loud, which was worse to stand in. She had made a spreadsheet. She had it on her phone and she showed it to Deb. The 168, plus the 200 for the piano, minus the landscaper, minus what she called her time. She told the room she and Trevor were taking Ren to a lake house in Hocking Hills for fall break, that she had already put the deposit down, that she had paid off the Tahoe in August. Paid off the Tahoe in August. Thousands of dollars a month had been coming out of an 86-year-old woman's checking account on Tuesdays since March, and a certificate of deposit she had held since 2011 had been closed out in April. At some point she came over to the corner where I was standing with a plastic cup of water, and she put her arm around my shoulders in front of everybody. And she said it again, the way people retell a joke that worked. You know what my favorite part of all this is? She's not even mad about the man in the car. She squeezed my shoulder. Honey, I'd have been flattered. I stood there with her arm around me. Somebody laughed by the ice. I said, Friday at 10. She said, Friday at 10. Bring your license, sweetheart. The money's already spent. I put my cup in the trash bag by the door and I went out and sat in my car in the driveway of the house I had lived in for 4 years. And I looked at the porch with no swing on it. And I said one thing out loud to nobody. And it was 5 days early. Friday at 10. Ohio Valley Title is a converted bank building on Sackett Street with a conference room that has a long table and 11 chairs and a bowl of mints nobody eats. I got there at 9:50 on the 25th of September with my driver's license in my back pocket and the manila envelope of certified copies in my bag. And I want to say the next part plainly, because it is the part people misunderstand about me. I would have signed it. If Danielle had sat down at that table and told Bernadette Kohler the truth about the March papers, I would have signed the release, and the house would have been sold the right way later, by my grandmother, with her own hand, and the money would have gone into her care, and I would have gone home with nothing and been all right. I had the pen in my hand at 10 o'clock. That is not a figure of speech. Danielle came in at 9:58 with a Starbucks cup and a tote bag, and she was wearing a blazer. Dustin came with a folder and a man from a hard money lender in Dayton who never said his name and looked at his phone the entire time. Trevor came, which surprised me. He stood by the wall until Bernie asked him to sit down, and then he sat 2 chairs away from his wife and did not take his jacket off. Bernie Kohler has been a closer for 22 years. She has that voice, the airline voice, the one that makes $168,000 sound like a bus schedule. Before we started, Danielle went out to the hallway to take a call, and I followed her, and I gave her the last thing I ever gave her. I said, Danielle, before you sign anything in there, go tell Bernie about the papers from March. Tell her yourself, right now, before we sit down. She looked at me over the top of her coffee for about 3 seconds. Then she said, Are you threatening me? I said, no. I'm telling you that this is the last time anybody is going to offer you that. And she laughed. She laughed the way she laughed with her hands in a donation bag, and she said, God, you are exhausting. Sit down and sign the paper, Gretchen. I have replayed that hallway more times than any other 30 seconds of my life. Detective Ruddock had told me I did not owe her that. Ray had told me I was crazy to do it. I did it anyway, because I needed to be able to say for the rest of my life that on the morning of the 25th of September, in a hallway with a water cooler in it, I held a door open for her, and she looked at it and shut it herself. We sat down. Bernie started with the seller's package, because the seller signs first. Deed of conveyance signed Ada L. Nichols by Danielle R. Nichols, attorney in fact. Closing disclosure, proceeds authorization directing disbursement to an account ending in the last 4 digits Danielle had opened at Ashbury First in March. Then the owner's affidavit. Bernie read the operative paragraph out loud, the way closers do, in that flat, pleasant voice, and I watched Danielle listen to it with her pen already uncapped. That the affiant knows of no unrecorded instruments, no other agreements affecting title, no proceedings, and no facts by reason of which title might be disputed or questioned. That the power of attorney under which the affiant acts remains in full force and has not been revoked, and that the principal is living. Bernie said, And she's living? Danielle said, She's in a nursing home in Ashbury. That's what the power of attorney is for. Bernie slid it over. Danielle signed it. The title company's notary, the girl from their front desk with the seal, notarized it at 10:06 in the morning. And then Danielle said the sentence that I did not plan and could not have written. She looked at me across the table with the affidavit still under her hand, and she said, See, that wasn't so hard. Some of us just do what needs doing. Bernie was turning pages toward my release when the front bell chimed in the lobby. Ray Kessler came through the conference room door in a golf shirt with a red accordion folder under his arm, and he said, Morning. And he pulled out the chair directly across the table from Danielle, and he sat down in it. Her face did something I am not going to be able to describe. He put the folder on the table. He did not open it right away. He set his hand flat on top of it, and he said, in the mildest voice in the world, Mrs. Nichols, every time you paid me, I kept the invoice. You initialed every one of them. 19. Dustin said, Who is this guy? The man from the hard money lender put his phone down. Danielle stood up so fast her chair went back into the wall, and she said, This is a private closing. You need to leave. And Bernie Kohler said, Sit down, please. And I have never heard the airline voice do that before. Then I took the manila envelope out of my bag, and I did not stand up, and I did not raise my voice, and I slid it down the table to Bernie with 2 fingers. I said, You'll want to look at Exception 9 before you disperse anything. Bernie opened it. Certified copy, revocation of transfer on death designation affidavit, March 12th, signed Ada Nichols. Certified copy, general power of attorney, March 12th, signed Ada Nichols. Mercy St. Anne Hospital radiology record, March 12th. Procedure started 10:15 a.m. Modified barium swallow study completed and read, with the patient's right-sided weakness noted on the same page. And a copy of a page from the county recorder's public request log, dated July 2nd, in a licensed investigator's small, neat handwriting. Bernie read for a long time. Nobody in that room said one word. You could hear the mints. Then she closed the envelope and squared it against the edge of the table and said the 12 words that ended it. I'm not insuring this file, and I'm not dispersing any funds today. Dustin's lender stood up and walked out of the room while she was still talking. Danielle said my name. Then she said it again, louder. Then she went all the way, in a conference room with 7 adults in it. And it came out of her exactly the way it comes out of people when the paper stops working. You did this because you have nothing, because nobody wanted you and you've got nothing else in your life, and now you're going to take it from a child, from Ren, from your own brother, because you couldn't get a man to stay in a house with you. Trevor was looking at the table. I let her finish. Then I said the only 2 sentences I said to her in that room. She said no in March. You wrote her name anyway. Ray Kessler slid the accordion folder across the table to Detective Ruddock, who had been standing in the lobby doorway since about 10:08, holding his glasses in his hand. I left that conference room at 10:40 in the morning with my driver's license still in my back pocket. Bernie Kohler was at the copier when I went past her office, making a second set of everything, and her hands were not steady, and she said, 22 years. In the parking lot, Danielle was standing by the Tahoe she paid off in August with her phone against her ear, saying the word grandmother over and over in a voice that was going up at the end of every sentence. Trevor came out after me. He got as far as the driver's side door and said, Gretch, I didn't know about the money. I said, you knew. She said no. Then I drove 11 minutes to Ridgeview and got there at 11:20, which is not 4 o'clock. And my grandmother was not in the chair by the window because she does not sit there in the mornings. I told her the house did not sell. She said, who stopped it? And I said, the county did. Which was true, and which is the only version I ever gave her, because a woman who has had her name forged does not need to be told that her granddaughter has been managing a calendar since August. That night I wrote 3 lines in the notebook. September 25th, 79 degrees. The file did not close. Detective Ruddock called at 6 o'clock while I was standing at my sink, and he asked me one question I had not thought about even once in 5 weeks. He asked whether my brother's name would turn up anywhere in anybody else's handwriting. Here is what a closing that does not close sets in motion, and none of it is dramatic, and all of it is permanent. Bernie Kohler did what a title company is required to do, which is file a written notice with her underwriter identifying a suspected fraudulent instrument in the chain of title on parcel 14-00362. That notice went out Friday afternoon. It is why nothing on that parcel could be sold, mortgaged, or transferred by anyone for the next 4 months. Detective Ruddock got a warrant on Tuesday the 29th for the records of 2 accounts at Ashbury First Credit Union and for the Member Services Notarial Journal for the month of March. Kelly Brandt kept a red logbook. She kept it because the credit union required one, and she filled it out carefully, because she was a careful person doing a careless thing. March 12th. 2 entries, 10:30 a.m., both marked signer identified by personal knowledge, in office. 2 problems with that. At 10:30 that morning, my grandmother was on a radiology table in another township with barium in her throat. And there was a 3rd line in the logbook, under the 2 entries, in the column the credit union used for anyone else present in the room. Witness present, T. Nichols. My brother's name, in a notary's own handwriting, in a book he did not know existed. He called me the next night at 11 o'clock. I let it ring twice. He said, Gretch? Then he didn't say anything for a while, and then he said, she told me it was for the Medicaid. She said the papers were so the house wouldn't get taken by the state. I asked him one question. I asked whether Grandma had said no. He was quiet. Then he said, she said, ask me when Gretchen is here. I did not yell at my brother. There was nothing to say to him that the sentence he had just repeated out loud in his own kitchen had not already said to him better. I said, then you know what you have to go do tomorrow. He said, she's my wife. I said, she's your wife. Grandma is the woman who paid for your teeth. He went in on the 1st of October and gave a statement to Detective Ruddock that ran 40 minutes and put his own name in it 4 times. He told them what Danielle had counted out for the woman at the member services desk that day, in cash, in the parking lot. $300 a signature. He had watched her do it through the windshield, and I want to be fair to my brother in this telling, because he did the one thing that was still available to him, and he did it knowing exactly what it cost. Danielle was charged on the 2nd of October, theft from a person in a protected class, a felony of the 2nd degree, because $61,400 sits in the range where the statute stops being about the money and starts being about who you took it from. Forgery, tampering with records, 2 counts of falsification. A grand jury indicted her 3 weeks later on all of it. They did not take her out of her house in handcuffs at dawn. That is television. Her attorney arranged a surrender, and she walked into the sheriff's office on a Friday morning in the same blazer, and she was booked and released on her own recognizance by 2 in the afternoon. Kelly Brandt was served a notice of intent to revoke on the 9th of October, and her commission was suspended that same week. Ashbury First terminated her 4 days after that. The revocation itself came down in December for notarizing a signature not made in her presence. In the same week, she pled to falsification and took community control and a fine. And the last I heard, she was working nights at the distribution center off Route 4. Dustin Pruitt got his earnest money back eventually, which took 11 months and his own lawyer. What he never got back was $8,500 in hard money commitment fees, the inspection, and a rate lock he had paid for on a house that could not be sold to anybody. Halden Ridge Property Group went on the underwriter's list of entities they will not insure. 2 other deals he had going that fall died on the vine, and in November, he sued Danielle for his losses, which is a thing I never saw coming and which was, I have to admit, funny. And on the 12th of October, a caseworker at Cranmer County Job and Family Services took the transfer penalty off my grandmother's Medicaid file because a criminal complaint is documentation, and because money that is stolen is not a gift. 9 months of penalty, gone in one letter. She kept the bed by the window, 11 minutes from my apartment. Danielle called me 11 days after she was charged, from a number I did not know, and she did not sound warm, and she did not sound loud. She sounded like a woman reading from a list somebody had helped her write. She said the prosecutor had offered 30 months. She said her lawyer said the recording of the phone call with the investigator was the worst part. She said Trevor had moved into the apartment over the shop. Then she got to the actual call. Ren is 8 years old. She asks me every night, "Do you want her growing up with her mother in prison? Is that what Grandma would want? You're going to be the reason that child doesn't have a mother in the house." I want to tell you what I did with that, because it is the only time in 8 months that I had to hold onto the edge of a counter. I said, "You wrote her name on 2 documents and took $61,400 out of her account. You hired a man to photograph me taking the garbage out. On the 8th of September, you told an 86-year-old woman I had sold her house, and she cried in a session with her speech therapist, and it is in her chart." Then I said the last thing I have ever said to my sister-in-law. "Ren has an aunt. Nobody's taking that away from her." And I hung up. And then I called my brother and told him to bring his daughter to Ridgeview on Saturdays at 2, and that I would make sure I was there when she came, and that if he ever brought Danielle onto that property, I would have the facility handle it and not him. Ren taped a horse with too many legs to the wall next to her great-grandmother's bed, and my grandmother, who could not say the child's name for the first 2 months after February, learned to say Ren before she learned to say the word Thursday. That is the part of all this I would keep if I could only keep one. On the 27th of October, Danielle's attorney filed an application in probate court to have my grandmother declared incompetent and to appoint a guardian. Not because anybody believed it, because a woman who is declared incompetent cannot give a victim statement. I had been waiting for something like that filing since the afternoon they turned me around in that lobby, which is why, back on the 10th, on the day I washed my grandmother's hair, I had stopped at the therapy office on my way out and asked for one thing in writing. Not a favor, a formal one, a documented communication and decision-making capacity evaluation, with the accommodations she needs written into the report. Extra processing time, yes or no framing available, 1 idea per question, no interruptions. The speech pathologist looked at me for a second and said, "Nobody ever asks for that." She did it on the 22nd of September. 11 pages. Patient demonstrates intact orientation, recall, and reasoning. Expressive aphasia with intact comprehension. Patient is able to state preferences, identify persons and property, and explain the consequences of decisions. Patient is capable of directing her own affairs with communication support. The probate hearing was on the 6th of November at 9 in the morning, and my grandmother wore the blue cardigan and they moved her hair day from Thursday to Friday morning for it. Danielle's attorney had built the application on 3 things: that she was in a skilled nursing facility, that she had aphasia, and that she had, quote, executed inconsistent instruments regarding her real property. Inconsistent instruments. That is a phrase a man in a suit uses when what he means is that his client forged something and now needs the forgery to count as evidence of confusion. The court investigator had already been out to see her. The magistrate had the 11-page evaluation, and then the magistrate did something I did not know they could do, which is that she came down off the bench and pulled up a chair and sat down in front of an 86-year-old woman in a wheelchair and asked her 3 questions herself. Do you know why we are here today? My grandmother said, they sold my house. Do you know what a power of attorney is? She said, somebody signs for you. Then she waited and got the rest of it out. I did not ask anybody to sign for me. And the last one, is there anything you want to tell me? She took a long time with that. Long enough that Danielle's attorney started writing something down. She said, I said, ask me when Gretchen is here. Nobody asked. The application was dismissed from the bench at 9:40. In the order, the magistrate noted that no evidence of incapacity had been presented, and that the application appeared to have been filed for a collateral purpose. Filed for a collateral purpose. Judges have their own way of calling somebody what they are. In the hallway afterward, my brother was standing by the window with his hands in his pockets, and he asked me if he could start driving Grandma to her appointments. I had a folded page in my bag, and I had written it 2 weeks earlier, and I gave it to him. It was a schedule: Tuesday cardiology at 11, Thursday therapy at 2, pharmacy on the 1st of the month, and at the bottom, 3 lines about what happens in the car and who is not in it. He read it and said, you typed it up. I said, sign it and I'll get you a key to the new place when there is one. That was the boundary, and I built it out of paper too, because paper is what my family understands. 2 days later, on the 8th of November, my grandmother asked me to bring her the good pen. She meant the one from the kitchen drawer, the Parker with her mother's initials on the clip, and it took her 3 tries to tell me which drawer, and I drove to Pearl Street and got it out of a house with no piano and no swing, and nothing in it but boxes I had labeled myself. When I came back, she had the aide set up the tray table, and she had a legal pad on it, and she had already had somebody call a realtor. I want to be careful here. I have gone over it 100 times, and I still get it wrong when I tell it. She said, sit. Then she told me, 1 clause at a time, over about 10 minutes, what she was going to do. She was going to sell the house herself, her name, her signature, her decision, on the market with a sign in the yard, at what it was actually worth. And she was going to revoke the transfer on death affidavit from 2022. The real one. The one with my name on it. Her own hand, her own choice, filed at the county. I said, Grandma, that's yours. That was for you. And my grandmother, who had lost the use of her right hand in February and the price of her own piano in September, said the thing to me that I have not been able to repeat out loud to anybody without stopping in the middle. She said, you are 29. She waited. Then she said, 4 years. You slept in the front room. Then she said, I am not leaving you a house. I am leaving you the rest of it. I sat in a vinyl chair in a rehab room with a horse drawing taped to the wall, and I put my head down on the edge of her bed, and she put her left hand on the back of my neck, which is the only hand she had, and she kept it there. The money went where she said it would go. $254,000 in February, a cash buyer, an inspection, everything the way it is supposed to be done. Enough to pay for a 1-bedroom apartment on Delaney Street with a ramp and an aide there 12 hours a day and no Medicaid application at all. Enough to put $30,000 into a trust for a little girl's school, which was her idea, and which she told me about in a sentence so short I had to ask her to say it twice. Wren didn't do it. She wrote the revocation out in her own hand on the 9th, left-handed, the letters like a child's, and signed it Ada L. Nichols with the L in it. And Ridgeview keeps a notary at its front desk, and that woman came in and watched her do it and asked her twice if she understood. Then she folded it and gave it to me and asked me to take it downtown. So on the 10th of November, I drove to the county building on Sackett Street and stood in line at the recorder's counter behind a man buying a plat map. And I handed a clerk the piece of paper that took my grandmother's house away from me, and I paid $34. The clerk stamped at 9:12 a.m. Same counter, same amount, 83 days. I sat in my car in that parking lot for a long time with the receipt in my hand, and if you want to know what winning feels like, sometimes it feels like that. Danielle pled on the 18th of December. She pled to an amended theft count, a felony of the third degree, and to the forgery, with everything else running concurrent, and she took 30 months. Plus restitution in the amount of $61,400, which the prosecutor's office turned into a certificate of judgment and filed 4 days later, so that it attached as a lien to a house on Bergen Court that she and my brother had bought in 2021. Filed at the same courthouse, one counter down the hall from the room where she had put my grandmother's name in March. The hearing was at 1:30 in the afternoon in a courtroom with radiators that knocked. 6 of us in that gallery from that kitchen in August, which I did not plan and did not miss. 4 of them sat on my side of the aisle. Deb sat in the middle and did not look at anybody. My grandmother gave her victim statement from her wheelchair with the microphone brought down to her. She had practiced with her speech pathologist. Short lines, spaced out, with a card in her lap she never looked at. She said, "Danielle, look at me." And Danielle did. Because when somebody says it like that, people do. "You wrote my name on 2 papers. Wait. You never asked me once. Wait. I would have said yes to a loan. Wait." And this one she got out in one piece, and her voice did not shake. "You did not want to ask. You wanted me gone." Then she said the last part to the judge, and it is in the transcript, and I have the transcript. She said, "There is a notebook. 11 years. It is not evidence. It is a list of the days somebody stayed." She said, "My granddaughter is in it, every page." Then she folded her hands, the good one over the quiet one, and she said, "That is all." And the bailiff moved the microphone away. The judge imposed sentence at 2:15. Danielle signed the judgment entry at the defense table with a county pen, which was, by my count, the 5th time she signed her way into something that year. They took her through the side door at 2:22, and I sat in a courtroom with a knocking radiator, next to a woman who had just told a judge full of strangers that I was on every page of an 11-year ledger, and for the first time since the 8th of February, I did not have anything on a list. Ray Kessler was in the back row of that courtroom in a sport coat, and I did not know he was coming. He had self-reported to the licensing board in October, for the months in the spring and summer, when he took a job without ever checking who owned the house he was sitting outside of. He got a 90-day suspension and a letter in his file, and he took it without an attorney. In the hallway he shook my grandmother's hand and he said, "Ma'am, I want you to know I never went in your house." And she said, "You kept your papers." Then, after a second, "Good man." He got in his car and drove back to Springfield, and now he does insurance work, and every Christmas since he has sent my grandmother a card with a picture of a cardinal on it. That night I brought her the notebook. It had been in a donation bag on the 18th of August with the dish towels, and it had lived in a plastic bin in my closet since, and come out most nights. And I put it on her tray table and turned it to the first blank page after found the good scissors. I had written in it 22 entries between August and December in my handwriting, the dates and the numbers and nothing else, because that is how she taught me to keep a record. She read every one of them. It took her 40 minutes. Then she closed it and pushed it back across the tray toward me, and she said, "Keep going." She transfers with a walker and one person now. That took 10 months, and a therapist named Yvonne twice a week, and more failed attempts than either of them wrote down. 6 months later, on a Saturday in June, my grandmother sat on a folding chair outside a one-bedroom apartment on Delaney Street with a ramp, in front of 6 peony plants that had spent a winter in a coffee can in the trunk of a Corolla, gone into the ground along the ramp in March, and put up buds on 4 of the 6, and I want to walk you through where everybody landed. Because in my family, nobody ever tells you the ends of things. Danielle Nichols is in Marysville, 30 months. Her lawyer has already explained judicial release to her, and there will be a hearing about that someday, and I will be in the room for it. In May, the house on Bergen Court sold as part of the divorce, and $61,400 came off the top of the proceeds to satisfy the judgment lien, which means the piece of paper she made in March took her house in a little over a year. She writes to Trevor about Ren. She has not written to me, and I did not expect her to. Trevor lives above the shop. He filed in February. He drives Grandma on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and he has never once been late. And he signed the schedule I typed, and he has a key. In April, he asked me if I thought he was a coward, and I told him the truth, which is that on the 12th of March he stood by a door, and on the 1st of October he walked through one, and a man is allowed to be both of those things in one lifetime. Kelly Brandt has no notary commission, and with a revocation and a falsification conviction in her file, she has no realistic way to get one back. She works nights, and she carries a misdemeanor conviction for falsification, and I have thought about her more than I expected to, because she is the only person in this story who did what she did for $300. Dustin Pruitt lost his earnest money and his underwriter and 2 deals, and his lawsuit against Danielle is still sitting on a docket somewhere behind 200 other cases, and he will never see a dollar of it, because there isn't one. My Aunt Deb called me in April. Her own mother is 89, and there is a nephew asking her about signing something. She wanted to know how a person gets certified copies. I told her. The whole thing. The counter, the raised seal, the $34, the logbook. And then I said the one sentence I had earned the right to say, and I said it kindly, because she had said her sentence kindly too. Deb, I'm going to help you with the papers. I'm not going to sit in a room and listen to anybody talk about your mother like she isn't in the building. She said that was fair. The family sheet group text has not had a message in it since the 25th of September. There were 9 of us in that kitchen in August. 4 of the other 7 sat on my side of the aisle at the sentencing. Deb sat in the middle. 2 did not come at all, and both of those 2 sent me a message in January asking whether there was any way to get Grandma's dishes back, and I told them where the Goodwill on Route 4 is. Ren is 9. She comes on Saturdays with her father, and there is $30,000 in a trust with her name on it that her great-grandmother decided on before anybody had been sentenced to anything. And she has never been told one word about her mother by me. She is learning to play on a keyboard I bought at the pawn shop on Sackett Street for $80. Grandma sits next to her on the good side and taps the count on the arm of the chair with 2 fingers. I finished my coding certification in May. I still process claims, but I do it for a hospital system now, at $28 an hour with benefits, from an apartment 11 minutes from Delaney Street with a bed in it, an actual bed, which I bought in March and cried about. And I am not going to explain that to anybody. In April, I went to dinner with a man who fixes HVAC systems and asks a lot of questions, and I did not cancel. And there has been a second one and a third one, and that is all I am going to say about that, except this. The whole way through, the thing that family said about me was that nobody wanted me. They said it in a kitchen with 9 people in it, and they said it in a title company conference room, and the only man who ever drove past my house in 4 years was on an invoice. That was never the injury. I want to be precise, because I have had a year to be precise. The injury was that I had spent 4 years doing something that no one in that family ever once said out loud that they had seen. That is what I was starving for, and it turns out you cannot get it from people who benefit from not seeing you. I got it in a courtroom with a knocking radiator, from a woman with one working hand, who told a judge there was a notebook. My grandmother has never seen the ocean. She said it in February, out of nowhere, watching a commercial. 86 years in Ohio, and she has never once seen it. And when I asked her if she wanted to, she said, "Before I quit." Which is her joke, and it is not funny, and she loves it. So in August we are taking the train from Cincinnati to Washington and then a car to Rehoboth Beach. And it is paid for out of her own money, from her own house. And the aide is coming with us, and Trevor is bringing Ren down on the Friday. She has a list on her tray table of things she wants to do there. There are 4 items on it. One of them is just the word feet. On the Saturday in June, sitting in the folding chair in front of the peonies, she asked me to get the notebook out of my bag. She wanted the date written down. 61 degrees, rain in the morning, 6 plants. All 6 came back. She dictated it and I wrote it. And then she made me read it out loud to her. And she nodded once, the way she does. Then she said, "Put your name." That is where I am telling you this from. An apartment 11 minutes away, on the first Tuesday in July, with a spiral notebook on the table beside me that has 11 years of her handwriting in it, and about a year of mine. If you have made it this far, you are probably the one in your family who stayed. Or, you are the one who is thinking about starting to count. So here is the only thing I know that is worth passing on. I did not beat my sister-in-law by being louder than her, and I did not beat her by being cleverer than her, because I am not. Every single thing that took her down was a piece of paper that already existed, in an office that is open to the public, that I was allowed to ask for. The recorder's counter, a radiology report, a request log at a counter, 19 invoices a man kept because he did not trust the woman paying him. Ask for the copy, pay the $34, write down the date. Now I want to hear from you, because I know how many of you are in that kitchen right now. Which one is it in your family, the person who takes the money, or the person who stands by the door and says nothing? Tell me in the comments, and tell me what you would have done in that hallway with the water cooler, because I still think about that 30 seconds. Thank you for staying with me through a long one. Wash your grandmother's hair the way she likes it. And I will see you next time.